right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Mindgasms. All right, so I'm going to do another Mindgasms Quickie here and talk about this metaphor that I thought of. Knowledge should be a web, not a tower. So I'm probably not far from the first person to think of this, and I might have even gotten it from someone and just not remembered. But I think that when we're talking and thinking about knowledge and we're trying to come up with useful metaphors, I think that the metaphor of a web is far more useful than the knowledge of a tower, or not the knowledge of a tower, the analogy of a tower and the image of a tower in terms of how we should look at knowledge and how knowledge should be organized. Because if you look at the idea of knowledge as a tower, for example, then it can be seen as a hierarchy in a way. Like at the very top, there's going to be the top and the most important knowledge. Like maybe that's where the ruler is, or maybe that's where the villain is, like Sauron in The Lord of the Rings or something like that. So it can be easy to see it as a hierarchy. And even if it's not necessarily a hierarchy, it's one bit of knowledge stacked on top of the next floor of knowledge. So it's bits of knowledge stacked on top of each other. And if we think about this in terms of the way science and academia is practiced and stuff like that, then you can see, and a lot of studies have shown this, that I recently learned about this from Freakonomics, which is a great podcast, and they've written good books. They kind of apply economics to social issues. But anyway, and I've heard this from other people before too, that it's basically common practice that when you get involved with a certain narrow field of knowledge, like biochemistry or the history of China within these 200 years, or anything like that, then what tends to happen is that people get better and better at rationalizing their opinions and beliefs. And because they imply their intellect to this one field of knowledge, they can become more ignorant about other fields of knowledge. So focusing deeply on one subject is very useful, in my opinion, for society, but it's good to kind of experience, let's say, expertise in a wide variety of different fields of study. So that's why this analogy of a web, I think, is far more useful. So, like, for example, if you think about the image of a web and you visualize that, then instead of knowledge being one floor of knowledge stacked on top of another one and then another one all the way up the tower of knowledge, with the top most important knowledge at the height of the tower, at the very top of it, then it's very different from the image of a web. With a web, if the web is knowledge, then it's interconnected strands of knowledge going off in different directions. And they're all interconnected, but they're different threads on the spider's web. And you could argue, yeah, that maybe the most important knowledge is focused in the center, but that's not necessarily the case. It seems like the center is made of the same material as all the other threads in the spider's web, and maybe it's the center of connection even, but it's not necessarily the most important. And if you think of a spider on a spider's web, for example, the spider isn't isn't always on the center of the web. It moves around the web. If there's a fly that is caught in the web, it goes to get that fly, for example, wherever that fly is on the web. And the spider is not even necessarily always is not even always on the web, right? Because the spider leaves its web a lot to go and explore. Like you see spiders on the floor in your house or outside on the ground or something like that, and they go and explore and they look for other prey and other flies to catch and stuff like that. So the spider doesn't even always stay on the web. So I think another aspect of this analogy that is very useful in terms of knowledge is that we can leave the web of knowledge. Of course, we can leave the tower of knowledge too, but I think that's important in both of those analogies. You can leave you can leave the knowledge and set the knowledge aside if you want to. Like perhaps if we're talking, depending on how we define knowledge, you're always thinking about it and it's always a part of the world, but you can set it aside and leave it to go and focus on more important things like the spider catching its prey or something like that. So you can leave the knowledge aside and go ahead and go out into the world. And I think that aspect of this analogy is also very useful because instead of all this armchair intellectualizing and armchair philosophizing, which I admittedly quite enjoy and I do it myself a lot, you can focus on doing things in the world, like actually doing physical actions and stuff like that, and not be so caught up in your head and thinking about the knowledge all the time. And even if you're an academic trying to solve a serious intellectual problem, even if you're in social science or something like that, going and like doing a workout or meditating or going for a walk or going to see a movie or something like that, that can be helpful to just detach your mind from the problem so you can uh, just take a break from thinking about it. And then if you take a break, sometimes if you come back to it, it can be helpful. And even it can help you see it from a different perspective too. So anyway, I think that's probably about all that I have to say about just the basic concept of seeing knowledge as a web instead of a tower. And I think particularly in our, let's say, our modern Western culture today in particular, there's a lot of like ideologizing, let's say, over which problems are more important to focus on, regardless of what one way of thinking we're talking about. And I think that this analogy of a web of knowledge rather than a tower of knowledge can be more helpful for reconciling those differences, in my opinion. So instead of focusing on this tower of this one particular set of ideas, when we're thinking about solving problems in the world in our current cultural and political landscape, it can be much more useful to see all of the problems, all of these different problems, and all of these different and interconnected problems rather than just one set of problems. So that's why I think that this analogy and the image of knowledge as a web is much more beneficial, especially in the long run, than knowledge as a tower. All right, so that's my soapbox preaching just about this basic concept of knowledge as a web instead of knowledge as a tower. And as I always say at the end of my videos, I hope you enjoyed this. I just have been thinking about this idea, and I think it's really interesting and useful. Hopefully, you find it interesting and useful as well. And as I always say, thank you so much to everyone for watching this Mindgasms Quickie. Hope you are interested in a lot of my other videos and check those out too, and my podcast with great and interesting people. Thank you so much to everyone who's subscribed to my channel. Thank you so much to everyone who's contributed to me on Patreon as well. And thank you so fucking much to anyone else who likes this video, shares it, subscribes to my channel, and or contributes to me on Patreon. I especially really appreciate any of that stuff, particularly Patreon, because it allows me to have more time to do more fun and useful and creative stuff like this. So, and yeah, like I always say, I love you all. Keep being the tiny beam of light that shines through the almost impenetrable darkness in the universe. And most importantly, always remember this: the funk cures all. All right, everyone. Adios until next time, and keep having mindgasms.